Russia claims that the United States is playing with nuclear fire over the Russia-Ukraine war issue, with Sergei Lavrov, the 20-year foreign minister of Russia, claiming that the genuine risks of World War III are rising. Now, he's been making comments like this really throughout the war, and most in the West don't hardly pay any attention today. But there are some things going on concurrent with this, which makes it a little bit more sober, and we need to be slowing down before we dismiss what he says here. And we're going to have Larry Johnson on with us today, the author at sonar21.com. Always got some great comments. Love having you on the show here, former CIA analyst, and just great dresser as well, with your shirt selection there. Welcome back to the show, Larry.
Yeah, I got my punditry wizard shirt on.
Wow. If you put those on sale, let me know, because I'd like to have one. I think I want to be a punditry wizard as well, but you're going to need it today. And it's good that you do, because I really think that things are starting to pick up steam. And we had Alexander Mercurius on earlier today on one of our shows, and he's his training has been a lawyer in the past in the UK. And he says some of his lawyer senses are kind of telling him that things seem to be fundamentally different for a number of reasons. Some negative on the Ukraine side, some positive on the Russian side, that's all together swirling, with comments like what Lavrov made today that concern him that something big is coming afoot. Before we even get into some of the details, I just wonder what your sensing is from where things are going in the war.
Yeah, no, it's going badly for Ukraine, and as it worsens for Ukraine's situation, the rhetoric in the West and the proposed actions in the West, not just in Ukraine, become more extreme and more unhinged. Is probably the best way to describe it. And so the latest development we have is Ukraine's announcing that they've developed a new drone. Now, what this drone is, it's a middle range cruise missile that can go out about 700 kilometers reportedly. I guarantee you, I'd take bets. Ukraine didn't develop that. That was developed by something like the CIA Skunk Works. Only it gets, I call it, it's the transgender cruise missile. It gets to dress up and self-identify as Ukrainian, okay? But it's not actually Ukrainian. But by saying that it's Ukrainian and the Ukrainians launch it, the West thinks, oh, therefore our hands are clean. Russia can't blame us for striking Moscow or striking someplace to the east of Moscow. Well, that line has already been crossed, and that's what Lavrov is reacting to. They've seen, once you show up inside Russia with German tanks, with swastikas on those tanks, with foreign military personnel, not just Ukrainians, but Poles and Germans and Brits. All of a sudden, it's now a new phase of this war. And so they're absolutely lining up to deliver a death blow to Ukraine, because they've made it clear Ukraine is not going to survive as a nation now. They are going to take Ukraine apart. Before, they were willing to let Ukraine stay in place, have a government and all that. No, that's over.
Now, we have people in the West that think about this in similar terms to what General Ben Hodges, we had him on our clip of him on our show a couple of days ago. And he's doing linear math and thinking that because basically the way things have been is the way things are going to be. And so they're thinking, okay, Russia's been at this huge military power for 2.5 years over this little bitty country of Ukraine. They haven't been able to quell them, even over the last 6 months, which he specified from Avdiivka to the current front location in the Pakros front is about 50 kilometers. And he says that's hardly anything. And so it's going to be another 5 months or 6 months before they get another 50 kilometers if they get that. So we've got time to mess around and do stuff like this Kursk offensive, which has strategic value, so-called, for the Ukraine side. But I think that you have a different view on what has happened before. And so let me put this in the form of a question. So what Hodges identified there, lots of people identified. In fact, I mean, you look at a map and it's accurate. That is how long it took to go that amount of space. And so it has been 2.5 years. And so the belief is, this idea that suddenly they're going to go on this big rampage and take these major cities of Odessa or Kharkiv and certainly Kiev is just fantasy, just like it was at the beginning. But you say it's not fantasy. And why is that?
So let's make this a very simple question. How many Iraqi civilians did we kill in that short period that we were in Iraq in that first month of invasion? We killed quite a few. How many Ukrainian civilians have the Russians killed over the course of the last 2.5 years? Very few. You know why we know it's very few? Because if it was a lot, their pictures would be on the front pages of every Ukrainian newspaper, every Western newspaper. We'd be hearing nothing about but how Russia's slaughtering Ukrainian civilians. But the fact of the matter is, Russia has been taking such pains to avoid killing Ukrainian civilians. That's why they have proceeded slowly. Now what's happened? We've learned in the last 48 hours, the military governor of the Donbass has actually ordered a mass evacuation of civilians. And they're ordering them out, which actually helps the Russians, because we've already seen in the last 72 hours, the Russians have taken several towns almost intact because the Ukrainians aren't stopping and fighting it street by street. And so what we're seeing is a dramatic acceleration of this. And then sort of the cherry on top, which I couldn't believe when I read this today, General Syrskyi, the chief, the head military guy in Ukraine, he was lying. He was saying, "Oh yeah, we're continuing to make advances in Kursk, but we're really facing a tough time down in Pakros in the Donbass, and that's because the Russians outnumber us. But our operation up north succeeded because our goal," and he said this, "our goal was to force the Russians to shift troops from the Donbass to Kursk." And you're going, okay, wait a second, man. You've done so many backflips in this paragraph that you've spoken. On the one hand, you said that you forced 30,000 Russian troops from the Donbass to go north, and yet the Russians are kicking your butt dramatically so that you say you're in trouble. Which is it? Well, he's lying. Yeah, their goal was to try to force the Russians to divert troops. The Russians had plenty of reserves. They poured reserves in that they had positioned up in Belarus and other places. At the same time, they continued to pour forces into the Donbass, and the Ukrainians can't match them. Why? Because they withdrew some of their best units from the Donbass and moved them up north. So we've seen an acceleration over the last really 3 to 4 weeks of Russian movements to the west. They're not being stopped. And already the Ukrainians are reporting they don't even have time to stop and dig defensive trenches, and they don't have good terrain where they can do that. And their claims that they're on the advance in Kursk is nonsense.
Yeah, and in fact, Gary, if you can bring up that comparison map that I have up here, this is from the Institute for the Study of War. On the left side here, this is what their position was on the 16th of August, and the one on the right there is the one as of yesterday. And all the blue thatched area is the Russian territory where the Ukraine side has forces. What you can see is that they're almost identical. There's a little bit more progress on the right after 10 days than the one on the left. But in the last several days, actually the Ukraine side has lost a handful of these little settlements, whatever, where they've been trying to push Russia. They've gained a couple, but they've lost a couple. So the net is nearly no change at all. So let me ask you, from a military perspective, when you can see that after 10 days after the first picture there, and 3 weeks after this thing has begun, that's as far as they've gotten from a military perspective. Can you sustain this from the Ukraine side?
Well, no, and let's be clear about, they don't control that. They don't have fire control over that road network. The Russians do. The Russians are blowing up every truck convoy that tries to come across to resupply these guys. So what you have, reportedly the unit started off with 15,000 Ukrainian soldiers, 12 to 15,000. Right now, the Russian MOD is reporting casualties in excess of 7,000. So you're looking at more than 50% losses on the Ukrainian side. They're holed up in these little Alamos and these villages. These are small villages and very small towns. These are not large cities. The biggest problem is the Institute for the Study of War. I went back. I looked at every single one that are writing their analysis every day. Not a single one, Danny, with any military experience. Zero. They're all political scientists. They're all academics. They wouldn't know a battalion from a division.
It's funny. I usually say, apparently I didn't hear, anytime I show the ISW map, I always point out that they are really, really good at depicting the maps and showing accurately where things are on the front line, and really bad at analysis. Sometimes I think that's by design and not just incapacity, but maybe there's a combination of both.
Yeah, look, when you hire people that don't know, that have never done it, that don't have the experience, and I don't claim to be some great military expert, but I spent 23 years working with the Special Operations Forces. You do pick up some stuff by osmosis.
Yes, you probably did a few things in just 2 decades of service. Yeah, sure.
I learned. I had the ultimate lesson that if you're on a C-130 and you have to go to the bathroom, don't.
You really don't. So please don't.
Yeah. Otherwise, you have to clean the toilet.
Let's look on. We had Alexander Mercurius on. I think I said that earlier today, and we were talking about some things. He claims that he had information from a Russian source that he's maintained over years of time that told him. I want to say it was more than 4 weeks before the Kursk invasion that the Russians were aware of what was going on. They knew the buildup was there in the Sumy area, and they had good intelligence that it was going to come into the Kursk area. They actually made it easy for them by demining certain parts of it to try and draw them in there. Whether that was true or not, or whether they really did, or whether Ukraine genuinely surprised them, as the claim is, almost at this point, it doesn't matter, because when you look at that map that I was showing you just a second ago, you can see that especially on the left and the right flanks, the Ukraine side has not been able to expand it. What little they had was basically forward, but they have not been able to expand it. And they continue to have to send in all these reinforcements just to maintain it, especially in light of the casualty rate that you cited there. Here's the big question. They will be coming to the point at some point very soon, if they're not already there, where they're going to have to calculate, okay, looking behind them, I don't have another 20,000 people just lined up in trucks ready to go. And if you don't have enough to sustain what's in there, then you're going to be forced to either withdraw the whole thing and keep what you have, keep the troops that you have so you can use them elsewhere, or you're going to keep the fiction going as long as you can, and then you may lose them all. How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, well, I think they're dead men walking, regardless of which path they choose, because if they stay in position where they are, there is the question of resupply, because it's not like you've got trucks or trains running back and forth from Ukraine into Russia now, bringing these guys, water and ammunition and food. So where are they getting that? Also, the question is, when they have wounded, how are they getting evacuated? It's not like they've got helicopter airlift that can come in. They're not able to be resupplied with any kind of fixed wing aircraft. So, there's the fundamental of logistics that's killing them right now, whereas the Russians have the advantage on that. They've got the air power. They have air supremacy, particularly there. They're able to use rotary wing. They're able to use fixed wing. They're able to use artillery. They're able to resupply their artillery, because it is, hey, you may fire off 100 shells today. That doesn't mean that another 100 shells magically appear tomorrow. You've got to resupply those. So the failure of Ukraine to actually figure out how they were going to sustain an offensive is, this goes back to the incompetence of the NATO planners. Because this was not just a Ukrainian operation. This is what has the Russians so furious, is that this was planned with the help of the United States and the Brits. and other NATO commanders. And their goal was to hurt Russia. And they really, these guys continue to believe that they can create some sort of incident in Russia that's going to be so devastating that they'll get rid of Putin. Now, help me with the logic here, Danny. Putin is criticized in Russia for being too moderate, for being too cautious, for being too unwilling to expand the war. And so the West's solution is get rid of the cautious guy that's least likely to draw and shoot you in the head, and run the risk that he'll be replaced by somebody who's a lot hotter under the collar, like said
Medvedev. Yeah. Let's see. I doubt the West would be a lot happier with Medvedev with a finger on the button as opposed to the cautious and methodical Putin.
So what the hell are they thinking?
Well, here's part of what they're thinking. You said the word at the top of the show here, which is going to be playing as a theme throughout the rest of the show, unfortunately, and that is some delusional thinking in Kiev and in Washington and Brussels and several other capitals in the West. So I'm going to show you a pattern that's going to start here. I'm going to show you here a clip from Zelensky on the 13th of August. So it's 3 days before that first picture on the left there that I showed you of the map where Ukraine had gotten into. And he gave his assessment of where Ukraine was on that day.
Today, there have already been several reports from Commander-in-Chief Syrskyi about the situation on the front and in the areas of our operation in the Kursk region. We are expanding the area of active operations. The Commander-in-Chief reported that our forces control 74 settlements in the Kursk region. Special attention is paid to the Kursk region, and thus to the protection of all our border communities nearby. The more the Russian military presence in the border area is destroyed, the closer peace and real security will be for our country.
Okay, so now, before I even go on to what's next, I mean, just on the surface of it there, you're talking about that was barely a week into the offensive operation. You have the country of Russia, and then you have whatever it was, 12 to 15,000 Ukrainian forces had punched a hole in a little piece of one of the oblasts here. And he's talking about the destruction of Russia leading to peace and security for his country. On the surface of it, you got to be thinking, what the heck did he just say?
Yeah. Well, he didn't get the reputation for being the cocaine cowboy for nothing, which does clearly affect his judgment. It is when you get detached from reality. But this is not unprecedented in history. We've seen at least the historical accounts about Hitler's final days in the bunker, that he was equally out of touch with reality. He was moving imaginary armies around and ordering people to do things that they couldn't do. And what we're witnessing is Zelensky is replicating some of that same scenario, where he's insisting that there's victories where there are no victories, and that anybody with an honest appraisal of military capability would step in and say, whoa, this is a bad situation. You don't want to be in this. And, unfortunately, as because I've been watching you over the last couple of days as well, and you've got ample examples of U.S. so-called military experts saying the stupidest, most ignorant things. They should, you can excuse Zelensky. He's a comedian known for playing the piano with one of his private parts. But so you don't necessarily want him to necessarily expect him to understand the importance of logistics, the importance of trained personnel, how difficult the training can be in order to get it. We're not just talking about individual training, but unit training and the communications and the coordination required. You can excuse him for that. But Hodges, Petraeus, Stavridis, let's go down the list. Yeah. What's their damn excuse?
Yeah,
incompetence.
It's unknown, and I almost fear whatever the answer may be. But you mentioned the Hitler bunker syndrome, whatever. Okay, so that was the 13th of August. Now then, you see that from that same time until now, there's been almost no forward movement, just a little bit here and there on the margins of it, but the casualty counts continue to just skyrocket by the day. In light of the time between that, this was reported today, that just this afternoon, that Zelensky is planning to present the U.S. with a victory plan in September. And the article goes on to tell that he apparently has a meeting set up with Biden and with Kamala Harris, and he's planning to go and visit Trump while he's there as well. And listen, you made the comment just a second ago. Okay, you can kind of forgive Zelensky for having this Hitler bunker kind of mentality, and he's just unwilling to look at reality. But if the White House actually took the meeting and said, yes, we're going to allow you to come in and give us your victory plan,
Right,
then maybe it's not just him in the bunker.
Oh yeah, no. Listen, he's being enabled both by military and or CIA, or a combination of the two, and not just on the U.S. side, on the British side as well. The Brits are actually more egregious. The British Ministry of Defense, for example, today put out a video claiming that the Russian pilots, now listen to what I'm saying, the Russian pilots in Ukraine have run out of water. They're restricted to 1 liter a day. Okay? And they put that out on a video as their claim, that the Russian logistics are so bad that Russian pilots in Ukraine. Now, last I checked,
Yeah, wait,
Russia's flying out of
where?
airfields in Russia, not in Ukraine. What the hell are they talking about?
Yeah. Most of those are like 40, 50 miles from the line of contact. So
Yeah.
they rarely get up there. I don't.
Yeah, I mean,
But-
so it's clumsy, it's stupid, it reflects sloppiness. I mean, my God, if you're going to produce propaganda, at least do a good job at it. You know, don't
Okay,
make it
but
like
Larry,
a B movie.
okay, help me figure something out here. Now, even delusion in terms of this kind of thing is still, you have to have some kind of connection to reality if you want to stay in power. And I'm talking about heading into an election here. It seems like the Biden-Harris White House would not want to be saying, yeah, let the guy come over in September and talk about his victory plan, when you see that they're especially because of what's happening in the Kursk area with the diversion of the very limited resources that they had. The East is starting to buckle around Pakros and several other places. I think you just mentioned there's some entire villages are falling in a day now that had been taken for a lot longer than that. And there is no rational path whatsoever for even to hang on to what they've got, much less to have a victory plan when you see your last big offensive push is just being eaten in Kursk right now. So the White House has to go, wait a minute, we don't want to continue to be seen as this, because, I mean, if this thing starts to fall apart before November, and that's a long time from now in certain respects, then they look really stupid. So what's the play here?
Yeah, well, nobody's in charge. That's part of the problem. You know, we don't, nobody, this, you know, remember we used the analogy, you're sitting on that airplane, you're sitting, I got an aisle seat, you look up the aisle into the cockpit, nobody's flying the plane. There's no pilot in the seat. And you're going, oh my God, who's flying this? That's our problem right now. And, you know, you've had other couple of developments in the last 2 days as well, that in that rocket missile barrage that the Russians fired into all across Ukraine.
Yeah.
They apparently destroyed at least 2 F-16s that were in hangar that had been brought into the country. Then on top of it, the Ukrainians are now out saying the reason their offensive failed in Kursk, because you do have Ukrainian military officers saying this now, and they're saying it to the Ukrainian press. The reason it failed, it was Elon Musk's fault, because Starlink, they got in there and Starlink went down. They didn't have comms. Well, let me suggest an alternative of what might have happened. Russia has this thing called electronic warfare. In fact, Russia's already demonstrated over the last 6 months that they can actually turn off Starlink if they want. Apparently, they wanted to that day. They turned it off in Kursk, left those guys blind in communications. And then seems well, now, if that's true, why does Russia allow Starlink to exist? Well, they get to intercept those comms. They figured out how to intercept. It's a good source of intelligence. Why turn off the intelligence and blind yourself? You only turn it off when you need to screw up with the Ukrainian operations, which apparently is exactly what happened. So, and it goes back to what your conversation with Alexander Mikuros about his source. I do know who his source is, and his source is solid. And what you had was a combination of that some people within the Ministry of Defense did not take the warnings sufficiently serious to ensure that preparation was made, while others in the Stavka, the defense staff, did take proactive measures to start moving troops into position so that when it did hit, they were in a position to envelop and suck them in. So it was a good news, bad news. It wasn't some clever, crafty plot. But when you put all that together, it's not going in Ukraine's direction, and they don't have anybody to reverse this. It's not like they've got a reserve army sitting out there that they're training. They're not.
Now one way they have this is definitely going to reverse the course here and just completely change the course, and that is with those F-16s, which are now, according to news media, have been flying into the combat zone. And one of the cheerleaders for the F-16 is your favorite Senator Lindsey Graham.
Oh boy!
When it comes to F-16s, way too long. They're here. Let's use them. Let's train Ukrainian pilots. When I talked to President Zelensky just a few minutes ago, if you're a retired F-16 pilot and you're looking to fight for freedom, they will hire you here. They're going to look throughout NATO nations for willing fighter pilots who are retired to come help them until they can get their pilots trained. So we're going to get these jets in the air sooner rather than later, and we're looking for pilots who are willing to fight for freedom as the Ukrainians train their own pilots.
Okay, before we look at the influence of the F-16s on the tactical battlefield, I just got to be thinking he's putting out like an Indeed want ad or something like that, and saying, "Hey, money's really good here, but you're probably going to die." So who doesn't want to come and take that job?
Well, plus he's conceding that the U.S. plan, the U.S. program to train Ukrainian pilots has failed, because if the program to train Ukrainian pilots had succeeded, and it's not just the U.S. plan, it was overall with NATO. If that plan had succeeded, he wouldn't be pleading for more pilots to come in and fly the things. But they're now admitting that whatever money was spent on training those pilots, you might as well have piled it in your front yard and set it on fire, because it's no use. And you're exactly right. What any pilot that knows how to fly an F-16 that would think this is a good deal, boy, you want to get the psychiatrist in talking to them first and foremost, because something's not connected properly upstairs if they're thinking that way.
But yeah, now let's actually look though that so it's. I think ever since this Kursk operation began, that's the first time I saw that F-16s were flying in the air and doing something. But you have seen absolutely no impact on the ground, pro or con, in the fact that these F-16s are flying, which you and I have been talking about since the concept even came up. And yet people keep on wanting to pin their hopes on something. But now where is that pin?
Yeah. Well, it'd be one thing if we actually had a video of it, if we saw some Russian tanks being blown up by an F-16 strike or something, but they're not letting them out into an area where they can be shot down, number one. And that's why the Russians went after him in the hangars. And apparently there was one of the Ukrainian pilots that had been trained was already dead. And they brought his widow to the warehouse to see the smoldering remains of one of the F-16s, just to comfort her. Hey, your husband died, you gave it a good effort. But, this is, if the loss of human life in this was not so fantastic in terms of the numbers, it would be a comedy show. We could find humor in it, but it's a horror show.
Yeah, it's a horror show.
Because I just saw the numbers. They've tracked the SIM cards, the cards you put in your phone, cell phones. They've been tracking those. those are down from 2.5 years ago. Those are 50% of what they were 2.5 years ago. What does that tell you? 50% of the people that used to have cell phones, no longer there, not at least not in Ukraine. So Ukraine is bleeding not just on the battlefield, but also with people migrating out. And as they migrate out, that means they don't have as many people to draw from to try to replenish the force on the front. I mean, it is a death spiral because they're not growing and expanding. It's not like everybody's having babies and people are flocking to come to Ukraine from other countries. It's just the opposite. They're getting out.
And, it's funny that Gary showing that headline there, right there, that Zelensky today confirmed that the F-16s were useful in shooting down some of the missile attacks. And of course, there's no proof of that, no evidence at all. But then you do have, and I wish I had been able to pull the map up in time, the map that showed where all the strikes were and landed. And you see literally every single oblast, without exception, suffered some missile strike that struck the target and hit, whether it's an energy infrastructure, a military facility, a ammo depot, something to that effect. Every single one of them. So it's as though that they have like no air defense. And so if it was true, and it could be true, I mean, that's why the F-16s, it's one of the things we claim that they can do. It was inconsequential and it doesn't make any difference.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is, you've got to say who has the military force, who's got the bodies, who's got the productive capability, who's got the industry that can sustain the operations. Well, that's Russia now. And what I think's really got people shocked or they're having trouble coming to grips with is how incompetent NATO is. Really, how inept we are. We always thought we were better than this. And it turns out, man, we can't even sustain the Ukrainian army with, pick your weapon system, HIMARS, Patriots, whatever. But then we're also discovering as we move out just from the European theater and get down into the Middle East, our Navy can't even beat the Houthis. So it's like, we're spending almost $900 billion on a Department of Defense that can't beat Russia and can't beat the Houthis.
Well, fortunately, they can definitely take out all of the country of China if we had got into a war there. So rest assured. Anyway, I shouldn't joke about stuff like that. But okay, if the F-16s aren't going to turn it around, then you know what will? Long-range fires. What we need is a little more of them. And so Zelensky went out today and asked for more of those.
The aftermath of the Russian strike is still being dealt with. In total, there were more than 120 missiles of various types and over 100 Shade drones. The missiles were launched from various locations, including the airspace over Kursk and Belgorod regions, other Russia's border areas, the Black Sea, and the territory of our occupied Crimea. Each of these strikes repeatedly brings us back to the task of long-range capabilities, the need to provide our defense forces with enough long-range weapons that can destroy terrorists exactly in the areas of their strikes. This is the optimal counterterrorism tactic, one that every partner of ours has the right to and would undoubtedly use to protect themselves. Okay,
so we already know, because we've talked about this several times, that even if you used long range, even if the United States said, you know what, every HIMARS long range we have, we're going to give every Storm Shadow missile from London that they have, they're going to roll into there. I mean, it's not going to make any difference in the war, because even if whatever gets through, some would, because that's just how the system works. It's going to hurt Russia. It's going to cause some damage here. But Russia does have a lot of air defense systems on its side. So it would still shoot down a lot. But you see that even on the Ukraine side, even with all of these shots that are going in all the time, with almost the air defense depleted, it still doesn't knock them out of the war. So it's not going to do the same thing to the much, much larger Russian Federation that does have air defense and they have their stuff spread out and all that kind of stuff. But there is a second issue besides the tactical utility or not of the weapons, and that is the reactions by the Russian side to the use of those weapons. I wonder if you could talk about that.
Well, it's going to expand the war. What it's going to do is if anybody in the West, it would be either the Brits, the French, the Germans, or the United States. Everybody else, they have nothing to contribute. There's not some special Spanish missile or the Italian missile. No, that's not going to happen. If we do that, then that's going to be seen as direct NATO intervention. That's why I think what's going on here is when Zelensky today or yesterday, they unveiled this brand new drone, which is it's a long-range fires missile. It's a cruise missile that they're claiming it's Ukrainian. This may be the solution they came up with, where they can claim that it's Ukraine designed, Ukraine built, Ukraine produced, and if they hit any target in Russia, that's the Ukrainians. That's not us. That's not the West. Where in fact we've been enabling it, completely enabling it. And Russia's at the point now where I wouldn't rule out the likelihood, without anything else happening, that they will hit bases in Poland and in Romania, just in order to take out military capabilities. Now, they'll be careful to ensure that they hit a military target and that they try to destroy a bunker, a warehouse, a storage facility, or a particular weapon system. But they're not just going to, go out and run the risk of killing civilians.
But now even if they were careful and succeeded, that's a whole different line that's being crossed, because now then you have almost the definition of an Article 5 event that needs to be addressed. So how would Russia deal with that?
Well, so Poland and Romania then have to go to their parliament and get them to vote. Say, yeah, we want to go to war with Russia. Let's everybody say, yay. They'll all of a sudden realize at that point they're not ready to fight. The United States is not ready. We do not have the logistics capability to sustain combat. We've already seen this. It's unrelated to the ground war, but it's part of the broader picture. Navy announced, we're going to have to decommission 17 ships because we don't have enough personnel to staff them. So, despite all this money that's been tossed at the Pentagon, that when it comes time to actually put troops out in the field and sustain them, it's one thing to get them there, but then it's another thing to sustain them in theater, and to sustain in theater at a level of combat that's what they've witnessed taking place between Ukraine and Russia over the past 2 years. We can't do that. The United States and all of its NATO allies are completely incapable of doing that, because certain key weapon systems, if it comes to using 155 millimeter shells, sorry, cupboard's bared. And ditto with Patriot missile batteries.
Yeah, that's the one thing. We apparently we do still have a wartime stock of 155, and we're ramping up the sustainment, but it's years away from actually being able to sustain a war. But the interceptor missiles and the Patriot anti-air missiles, et cetera, those are even more rare, even in our own stockpiles. And that's why we're starting to be given less and less, and have been willing to give less to the Ukraine side, because we might need to have them. But even if we didn't and literally unloaded all of them, we don't have that many.
Well, so Russia reportedly fired the other day about 300 drones and missiles. So if a Patriot batteries were in place to try to fend that off, that means they would have had to fire 2 Patriot missiles for every inbound target. That means they would have had to fire 600 of those in one day. Lockheed Martin in an entire year produces 550.
Yeah.
So I'm not a math genius, but I can figure out that kind of addition and subtraction. It don't add up.
Yeah. And of course, what we know for sure is that because the system is already so depleted, that they didn't even have one-to-one attack on a lot of these. I don't know if he has it handy, but Gary showed one in one of our previous shows a day or two ago from this strike. And you see, I think it's 3 slow-moving Russian missiles in a row in Kiev, just gliding into the target uninhibited. Right. They weren't able to shoot down any of those. And I'm thinking, man, if that's what happens in the capital city, what in the world is happening in these outlying places? They don't have anything out there.
Yeah, no, exactly right. And that it underscores that also with the Russian tactics, a lot of times they'll send the drones out first, as they use them like pawns in a chess match.
Yeah.
Put them out there, eat up our pawns. and then they come roaring in
Yeah,
with
that's
the
the one right
bishops,
there that
and
Gary's showing.
knights, and rooks, and take and really deliver some blows. And they've also they're basically turning off all of the electricity in across Ukraine, and it's just the combination of that. When winter comes on this year,
Yeah.
they're in trouble because it's not just the electricity; it's apparently
Right.
the ability even to get water into the cities.
Yeah,
Is
those missiles that Gary's showing right there, that's the ones that we're talking about.
yeah,
You just
yeah.
see them, 3 or 4 of them, one right after the other, with nobody knocking them down. And so that is important, because now then you see Ryabkov today is warning about the U.S. He named us by name, said the United States better be careful. And this might tail into what you were just mentioning there about the risk and the potential of Russia attacking even some NATO areas in consequence to us allowing some of our long-range missiles to be used throughout Russia, where he wrote the consequences of actions of the Russian Federation in response to the involvement of the United States in the attacks of the armed forces of Ukraine in the Kursk region may be more severe than they had been so far. And of course, he's being unspecific there, but that's in the context of that article that said there that Russian nuclear doctrine is being, quote, adjusted. And they didn't specify what they meant by that. And that was actually in response to something else that Lavrov had said earlier today. And we're going to get into that in just a second. But when you read stuff like this, oftentimes, in fact, usually in the West, this is just dismissed. Oh, they've been saying stuff like this the whole war. They've not done anything. And so there really are no red lines. And in fact, I wish I had pulled this one up, but Zelensky, at the first of this Kursk information, actually ridiculed the West and said, y'all are naive if you think that Russia has any red lines. Keep going and give us everything they want. Is he right?
Oh, man. No. And, you know, there's, I learned an expression when I lived in Latin America, and but the translation is they confuse being good with being a fool. That if you're kind to somebody, if you're good to somebody, that the person interprets it at that as a weakness, and that you can be taken advantage of. Well, that's exactly how the West is looking at Russia.
Well, yeah, you see that headline that Gary just pulled up there right now. Yeah, Putin keeps blinking, so don't even worry about it.
Yeah, they're mistaken. You know, the thing they don't understand is that none of the countries in the West have suffered the kind of losses that the Russian people suffered in World War II. You know, we talked about this before. In Russia, 16 out of every 100 Russians died, whereas in the United States, it was less than 1 out of 100 died. It was like 0.2 to 20% of 1% died in World War II. Well, when you have those kinds of losses, and then it lingers over to generations, it does make them cautious and reluctant to go into a total war mentality. But once they reach the point of recognizing, we've warned these people, stay away, don't punch me, don't keep poking me in the chest with your finger, I'm telling you not to do it. Then all of a sudden, when they unleash the fury, the West is going to go, well, where'd that come from? You know, they'll be completely surprised. It's you know, it's like those scenes that we've seen in movies where, you know, remember the old movie Billy Jack, where he's standing there and, you know, the sheriff's and he said, I'm going to take my right foot here and put it up in your side of your face, and nothing you can do about it. That's sort of, you know, if you're going to look for a movie character, that's Russia right now. They're like Billy Jack. And, you know, once you pass the breaking point, then all of a sudden this is going to change. And because they're saying, oh, they'll never bomb in Poland or Romania. I wouldn't be so sure about that. They'll never bomb in Germany. No. They'll never bomb in the UK. No, I wouldn't take that bet either. Hey, they'll never bomb in the United States. We're safe. I would not assume that either. That depending upon how egregious the attacks are inside Russia, if it expands anything beyond what it's been in Kursk right now, we're looking at a major escalation, because Russia, you know, they're trying to contain it, but we should not mistake patience for being weak.
Yeah, and we certainly are. And I want to show what Lavrov said today. We showed a short snippet of it earlier, but I want to go into a little bit more extensive of his comments here. Gary's going to start playing this in his browser for a second here, and then we'll be able to stop and start this as we go through to get some of your points here. But first of all, the first thing he's talking about here is if World War III could potentially come to Europe. Apparently, Americans think it will only be in Europe. Watch this.
Americans have this direct association, these conversations, this talk of a world war. They think that if this happens, it would only concern Europe, which is a very showing thing that reflects the mentality of those geopolitical strategists in the US, because they are confident that they will just be safe across the ocean. And in this situation, one has to understand that we have our own doctrine, a doctrine of using nuclear weapons, among other things.
Gary,
and we are
there for a second. So his first comment there is that that apparently the United States thinks that they can take risk because either the war is going to take place as it currently is on Russian Ukrainian soil, but if a big war comes, it'll just stay in the European side. So they're the ones that are taking advantage, and it won't come to the United States. But then he tags us and says, "But we have our own nuclear doctrine." What do you think he meant by that? Because he says that there's been some adjustments, but he didn't specify any. Do you have any idea what he means?
Yeah, no, I think what they're talking about is that they will hit key facilities in the United States that are weapon production facilities, weapon storage facilities, and offensive missile systems with tactical nukes. They're willing to. The United States, we've lived with this luxury of having Canada and Mexico on our borders, which basically have insulated us from attacks, even though we're being flooded with illegal migrants across the southern border, and to a lesser extent Canada. But then we've had the oceans with the Atlantic and Pacific on our shores. We never had to face some outside invader coming at us. But now the Russians with submarines and with a host of missile systems that can be launched out of Russia, the United States is quite vulnerable, and does not have an air defense system, an anti-ballistic missile defense system, to fend those off, whereas Russia does. And the other point, Danny, is as you've noted, this wasn't just Lavrov saying this. You also had Rybkov, who's the deputy in it. He was sending out the same message. When you got these two guys, I've met Rybkov, very serious man, not an emotional type, not, he's a great professional. When you got those two saying this is a coordinated message. They're not.
And listen, this is actually, and one of the reasons why it concerns me more than normal is because, and we've shown on the show several times, back in June or around the D-Day time, I remember he was making some emphatic positions to one of his somebody who was interviewing him in a press conference, that he says, we have nuclear weapons. He talked about our tactical nuclear weapons and how big they were and how many kilotons and all that stuff. And he was very, very stern in saying that we can use them. Now you have Lavrov saying that they're considering updating them. And that's of concern, because I thought it was already pretty clear, which Putin has said, and certainly some of their doctrine has said, that if the territorial integrity or the existential threat to the Russian Federation is threatened and put at risk, then we will use tactical nuclear weapons. And we also know from a CNN report earlier this year that Russia was seriously considering using tactical nuclear weapons in 2022 when they started losing territory in Kherson and the Kharkiv area, and were talked out of it. And that was relatively small now. But now then he's implying that something is different. And I don't know if you have enough insight. Maybe nothing has been able to broadcast, but I wonder if you can just speculate what could change from what Putin said in June.
Well, what's happening right now is the United States is building up its forces in Europe. It's been moving more units into Europe. And I know that from one of my buddies, retired. He retired from the Marine Corps, and then he ran the State Department military section and counterterrorism shop at State. and then worked with the FBI. So, he's an experienced guy. And it turns out his grandson was being deployed in September, heading to Poland. So what you've got is U.S. forces. The Russians are sitting back and they're watching the United States build up offensive military personnel in Poland and in Romania. Now, you're a military planner and an intel officer on Russia's side. You sit there and tell Putin, "Nah, don't worry about it. Those Americans, they're all talk. They're not going to do anything." Or you're saying, "We think they're getting ready to attack us, and so we're not going to step back and wait to be attacked this time. We're going to preempt." So that's I think why you're seeing this increase in rhetoric to let the West know we're flashing red here, and your actions are provocative. It says you're planting missiles on our border. You're talking about using long-range fires inside our country. You're bringing mercenaries. They've captured and killed foreign mercenaries in Kursk. They're just, they're not out advertising it, but the West knows what's been happening.
Yeah, actually, Gary here maybe a couple of weeks back found some footage and some photographs of a lot of American armor in Poland. It said Poland, it looked like a parade or something. As far as you could see, there was all these American combat vehicles being unloaded in Poland. So it's very clear. Didn't get a lot of press here, but as you say, it certainly was noticed in Russia. Let's continue on with the Lavrov piece here because he goes a little bit further in the next clip.
Now, making adjustments to this doctrine, and the Americans are well aware of this doctrine. And these are Freudian sleep. The World War III is a bad thing because we do not want Europe to suffer. That's the mentality of the Americans, mentality of masters that are sitting on the other bank across the ocean. They are certain of their safety and security, and they are confident that there would be someone else to die for them, to do their dirty job for them, not only Ukrainians, but now Europeans as well. So we heard these speculations regarding allowing to use not only Storm Shadows, but also American missiles, long-range missiles. And in Washington, an anonymous source said that there is an ongoing effort that they are looking into a request from Ukraine in a positive light. I do not want to add anything to that. The president has already spoken on this on many occasions, and we reaffirm this once again, that playing with fire, and they are like little kids who are playing games with matches. It's a dangerous thing for adults who were trusted with nuclear weapons in West country.
So it really sounds to me like they're maybe getting into another category mentally toward the possibility of using military force. Now, it could just be what you said there, that they had seen the advancement of U.S. military power. It could be they've got something else, intelligence that we don't even know about. I don't know. But there's another possibility, which I'm just, looking at putting tea leaves together and looking at some of the warnings and indicators. It really looks to me like Russia is getting ready to, for the first time since 2022, launch a big arrow offensive, as many call it, instead of this methodical, slow stuff they've been doing on the front lines. And it could be that if Ukraine gets to some specific weak point, whether it's because of the Kursk offensive or that there's a buckling in the middle of the front here, that Russia could go on big. And of course, you have Medvedev and you have a number of other Russians saying that because of the Kursk offensive, there's no more negotiations. That's off the table. Yeah. And now it's going to be the conquering of Ukraine. And if they start to move to actually do it, then there will be a risk that the West says, holy crap, we can't literally allow them to be, the Ukraine side to be defeated in military. We may have to go help them. It seems to me that Russia is mentally already in that part of the calculation and may have decided that if it push comes to shove, then they're going to be willing to shove. How do you read that?
Yeah, no, I agree. In fact, you're familiar with the term, the operational preparation of the battlefield. So these, when you get all this advanced operations that take place, Look at the last 2.5 years of this war as advon, as that advanced preparation of the battlefield. Because in that process, what Russia has succeeded in doing is depleted Ukraine of its military leadership across the board so that its units are very thin, they're untrained, they don't have any deep reserves. They've bled them of critical material, both on air defense, artillery, armored fighting vehicles down the line. And in the process, they've also reduced NATO's ability to respond. So now the environment is prepared that a big aerial offensive could make a lot of sense because you're not going to risk massive casualties because the ability of Ukraine and the West to fight back right now is minimal. It has been reduced. It's not saying it's eliminated, but within that, as Lavrov is making real clear, we don't have to pull up an interpreter to figure this out, that if the United States thinks that it can get into a war with Russia and that the United States is not going to get hit, they better go back and reread history because we will get hit. Russia's not going to let us go this time. We're not going to just let all the fighting and dying and bleeding take place in Europe. That's his message loud and clear. And, I don't think there's any politician over here paying attention to it.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Larry. Lavrov and Putin and several others have warned about the possibility of World War III. They've talked about the possibility of nuclear escalation, et cetera. That's really been on the table since the first of the war. This is the first I remember anyone, especially someone at Lavrov's position, expressly saying the United States homeland is not sacrosanct. Do you remember anything besides this?
No, not to verbally express it. No, this is, like I said, this is, and Lavrov's not a loudmouth. He's not Anthony Blinken, thank God. He is a serious, well-respected diplomat who measures every word he says. I'm not that temperate, but he is very temperate in what he says and how he speaks. And he's not going to say something like that without reflecting that there's been a decision made, because Putin met with the senior generals Saturday night. And that's an unusual time to, have everybody together for, a video conference and give me a brief on where we stand. But there's some big decisions being taken, and Russia's going to be prepared to move on those. And, the West has got an option. Call this thing off, back down, back away, put your gun down, get your hands up, stop the killing of Russians, or we're going to kill you. That's simple.
Now, it seems to me, Larry, that we are rapidly approaching a point, especially if Russia makes good on its apparent intention to launch a big aero movement. Now, Putin has said that they are going to respond strongly to the Kursk invasion. They have said that they're going to succeed in their they call the special military operations, et cetera. So he's put his name out there and his reputation on the line in Russia, domestically, that he's going to handle this stuff. And he's had lots of people grumbling and complaining that he has been too passive, throughout the war, especially this last 6 or 8 months or so. So it stands to reason that at some point he's going to do something. I mean, with all of this military capacity, whether big or fast or slow, they're going to methodically just grind this thing down. And eventually at some point they're going to win. I mean, it just almost is inevitable. It's hard to imagine it coming out anyway. Here's where I'm going to ask you here. We are getting to a point, and it could be more rapid than anybody's thinking in the West, where the United States and NATO writ large is going to have to come to a decision similar to what you just articulated there, to where we're either going to have to allow a loss to occur and suck it down. And that wouldn't be a bad move in this situation, because you could say, you know what, Ukraine, kind of sorry about this, but you're on your own. And we're going to have a negotiation. Say we're going to protect our left, our NATO eastern flank, and we're not going to have war, and we're just going to reset and, do better later, or something like that. Or we can say, holy crap, we can't allow Russia to win. We can't allow this to happen, because instead of harming Russia, we will have weakened our own side, and we can't have that. So there's going to be a risk to escalate. How do you see that decision-making process? And you talked about the heavyweights of Anthony Blinken, et cetera. And man, you can just go across Europe and there's equal low capability people around there. And I worry a lot that some of them may draw the wrong conclusions.
Yeah, we simply don't have the force. Let's look at look at the numbers. U.S. Army 452,000. The French Army roughly 120,000.
And by the way, just for our viewers who may not know, I want to point out, when you say there's 452,000 active U.S. Army forces, there's maybe 70, 80,000 actual fighting forces.
Exactly.
Exactly.
So take a percent. Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. That's when you look at the total number. So it's like in Britain, they've got 70,000 active duty. Well, they may have 10 to 15,000 combat ready. And like you said, 80 to 100,000 in the United States. Germany or France has got like 120,000. And so again, just reduce the numbers. Russia's got 1.4 million. So the NATO numbers don't even stack up. They don't even begin to stack up.
And forget about the experience level.
Yeah. And Russia's now actually got combat experience over 2.5 years where they've been winning. I mean, they say, oh, they haven't won anything. Well, they took Mariupol. They've taken Avdiivka. They've taken Bakhmut. They're now in the process of taking Pakros. They're moving and they're learning. And they've developed new tactics. I mean, just over the last week or so, They introduced a drone with a fiber optic thread that can't be disrupted with electronic warfare. They keep making innovations on the battlefield. They're not stupid. And so what are we going to do? Well, we're going to build up and pretend like we're going to, come punch them in the nose. But if you're the Russian military planner, you can't assume that we're stupid. You've got to assume that we're serious and that we're dangerous, and you're not going to risk your life or the life of your people. So you take us out before we get a chance to take you out.
Well, and let me also add in there, and this is for the Blinkens and the Austins as well, because I don't think they recognize this. They look at the numbers as well, and they see what the active forces for all the NATO folks might be, and they compare that with what the Russians have or whatever. But I am flat here to tell you categorically that the level of a conventional combat experience that the Russians have now, that they've paid for with a lot of blood, is triple, maybe even more than that, what we have on our side. Because people think combat experience is combat experience. Only if you haven't done it. If you don't know the difference, I can assure you that the combat experience we have in counterinsurgency and in Iraq and in Afghanistan and Libya and Somalia and all these kind of places isn't even useful at all. It's like having none in comparison to having these large operations here. And I can also tell you from what I have seen, from what I personally know, how a mechanized unit, Bradleys and tanks and stuff, how we operate, how we've trained, and how the war is actually being fought is radically different. If we go in right now, even if we've been to the NTC and these other places with some changes, and we've been talking about drones, but we've never lived it, and we've never seen all this heavy artillery bombardment or the missile strikes that come in or the electronic warfare stuff that the Russians have, we would get crushed in the first battles. And anybody who thinks differently is looking through the lens of their rose-colored glasses, because I promise you, as much as I love my country and love the soldiers who are wearing the uniform that I once wore, and I do not want them to go into that kind of battle, if our people send us into that battle, we will be shocked at the results, but you and I won't be, and we don't need to find out.
Right. Amen. I agree.
But so let me end with this question to you. If Russia makes any kind of big arrow move, and the Ukraine side, because they are now so brittle and so wounded that they start to collapse, how do you think the West senior leaders, and then we're talking about primarily the United States, Britain, and France, How are they going to respond? Are they going to do the wise thing and just accept the loss and cut off the wound and start rebuilding? Or are they going to do something stupid?
No, I think they'll do something stupid. I mean, we've seen that out of Macron in France with the arrest of Pavel Durov, the founder of Telegram. The West is going to react emotionally. They're not going to react intelligently. You need people that are thinking with the brain, not with the heart. These people are all about emotion, unfortunately.
Well, that's not very encouraging.
Sorry about that. You know,
not that I can disagree with any of it, but I mean, it sounded like I knew the answer already, but I was thinking, but you're a smart guy. And so you know more people than I do. So maybe there's, okay, but you didn't. But anyway, well,
I'm with you, Danny. I'm with you, man.
All we can do is bring the truth in here and continue to show people what is at stake and why it is so profoundly important that we get this damn war off the table, get it ended, get it resolved by the absolute quickest way we can. And listen, I'll say out loud, the best deal that Ukraine can get, which is going to be horrible now, and almost surely if the war stopped today, they would have to give up probably a lot more territory that Putin would demand before he even agreed to anything. But the alternative is to continue like this and pretend that a different world exists and keep fighting, and then they may end up losing everything. And that is the big risk that we face. And then we could all be on the brink of a stupid decision, which could actually end in the use of nuclear weapons. And the world as we know it would never be the same after that, no matter what happened next.
Follow the casino rules. Figure out how much money you're prepared to lose. When you lose that much, walk out. Because if you say, no, I have just one more, you're going to wind up broke and impoverished. And that's where we're headed.
Yes, it is. And well, listen, we're gonna keep on following this. That's great advice, and I hope that people listen to that. Thanks ever so much for coming on today. Again, remind everybody to go to sonar21.com to follow Larry. He's always got great commentary. I don't know if it's every day, but certainly pretty frequently.
I try to write every day.
It's
like milk and cows.
And but that's we get a lot of our material from there. So anyway, it's a good source there. Be sure and join us also tomorrow, because we've got Ambassador Chaz Freeman. We've got Doug McGregor coming back on. Always great guys to give really hard-hitting, true assessments of what's going on in the world around you. And you're not going to want to miss that. So tune in tomorrow. Be sure and like and subscribe, folks. I say that a lot, but if you're watching, you haven't subscribed yet, please do. It really helps out a lot more than you think. Thanks, and we'll see you tomorrow on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.